So, returning to our series of videos on a dialogue on race between two friends, this is video number 2. Again, Bill is asking these questions coming from a racist standpoint. Bill is not racist, but these are questions that he's heard posed to him in the past, questions that I've heard in the past as well. And so Bill's asking me questions to get my open and honest, authentic response to these questions.
All right, the next question. Why is it okay for Black people to use the N-word? Shouldn't all people not use the N-word?
All right, that is an age-old question that has been asked many times. So first of all, who said it was okay for Black people to use the N-word? There are, this is split within the African American community, that certain people say, we've taken the sting out of that word, we've taken it and we own it, where other people say you should never use the word at all. So here's the thing. That word was placed upon us by slave masters and by white people in America. The context with which they use it is very different than when Black people are using it. When someone who is not of color uses that word, the context and the connotation and the meaning behind that word is, I am calling you something that proves my superiority over you, my delusion of superiority over you, and I'm trying to call you something that represents something that is vile, something that is second class, and I'm showing you through the use of this word what I think about you. Whereas when African Americans or other people are using it in a completely different context, it is a slang term, and I am not justifying the use of it, but I'm explaining my understanding of the use of that word. It's very similar, Bill. I know you have a brother. If you haven't seen your brother in a while and you see him for the first time and you say, "What's up, jerk?" That's completely different than if I, who I don't know your brother, just walk up to him and say, "What's up, jerk?" Right? It's a different meaning of how I'm placing that word on your brother than when you're using that word with your brother. I've seen women refer to each other as bees, the B word, right? But they're not using it in necessarily a derogatory way, if that's possible. Whereas if I walked up to some woman on the street and just called her a bitch out of nowhere, it's a completely different understanding of the use of that word and the meaning of that word. Now, with that being said, Black people have also, and I think we'll probably touch on this a little bit later as well, but they've had to rename what they call Black people in America many times over the years, right? From colored to Negro to Afro-American to African-American to Black to many things. And so for many people, they think using the N-word, for many Black people using the N-word, they're saying we are taking a word that was meant to be derogatory and we're taking control of that word and saying we can call ourselves what we want to call ourselves within the context or within friendship, within slang, within whatever. But far be it from someone else to place, the meaning of that word on us. Now, I personally choose not to use that word. I personally choose to stay away from a word that doesn't have any positive context to me. And, I think people understand the difference between when someone is calling you something out of hate versus when someone is using an overused and inappropriate slang.
All right, next question. Blacks look at their numbers in the prison system and say, look at how full our prisons are with Blacks. It just proves that the justice system is unjust. While whites look at the large number of Blacks in the prison system and say, look at how full our prisons are with Blacks. It just proves that they are criminals. Who is right?
This is actually a pretty simple question and answer. There are documented cases throughout history up to this day where Black defendants in a trial found guilty next to the same case, maybe from a different jurisdiction, maybe within the same jurisdiction, exact same charges, exact same case, Black defendant found guilty, white defendant found guilty. On balance, the Black person will get a stiffer, longer sentence than the white person if the white person gets incarcerated at all. I have friends, I know you have friends, and maybe even firsthand experience where on even minor charges. I have a friend, they're in a mixed race, they're a mixed race couple. The gentleman is African American, the lady is white. They get pulled over, and this happened to them 3 different times. They get pulled over, they have marijuana on them. The white woman was given a warning and let free. The Black man he got arrested and went directly to jail. The marijuana was hers. They're together, they're in the park, they both get detained, but she's let free and he is arrested. This is not uncommon. This is an everyday occurrence in this country. It's been happening since the beginning of time, and it continues to happen. And so once you're in the system, if this happens to you again and again, one could say, well, you should have learned your lesson. Someone else could say, is there something bigger at play here, where as long as we can get an African-American man, usually, into the system, well, then now he has a record. Now he or she has a criminal history, and it makes it easier to incarcerate them for a longer period of time. Now, understand, I am not justifying criminal offenses. I am not justifying, acts of crime. And anyone who knows me knows that, especially for serious offenses, I think that people who do the crime should do the time, as long as it's fair and equitable across the board. It is not fair to lock up people of color. It is not fair that anytime a Black boy or girl over the age of 14 commits a crime, we immediately say, well, should they be tried as an adult? Where we have college-aged white defendants who've committed a crime and we're calling them children. Well, this kid just made a mistake. You take the case of the rapist out in Stanford, who was hiding in the bushes and raping women. But because I think he was on the swim team, the judge said, we don't want to mess up the rest of his life. He's a good kid who's made a couple of mistakes. This is a grown man hiding in the bushes and jumping out and raping people on campus at Stanford. But then when we take a 14 and 15-year-old Black boy, we try him as an adult and ruin the rest of his life. We try him as an adult, put him in an adult prison, but for some reason, other people are given the benefit of the doubt because we don't want to mess up the rest of their lives. I started off by saying it's a pretty simple question and answer, but it gets more complicated. But the case histories and the statistics prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that African Americans in particular are sentenced more harshly, put into the system more often, and given longer sentences than counterparts who've committed the exact same offense.
You and I have known each other for a long time, and you know that I don't drink and I don't drug. Yeah. But I'm not saying that I haven't in the course of my life. And there was a moment in time, I remember I was at a pond in Larchmont, New York, where I grew up. And at the time, we didn't have a whole lot of Black people living in Larchmont, New York. It's kind of a very white community. And I was around 18 years old, and I was smoking a joint with a friend of mine. And 2 cops pulled up and came over to us, and we were freaked out and scared. And they made us stand up, and they took our dime bag of pot and they turned it upside down and they mushed it into the ground with their feet and said, get out of here. We don't ever want to see you here again. And I remember when I was learning about implicit bias, that story came up. And then somebody said to me, now picture 2 people at the duck pond in lily white Larchmont, New York, and 2 white cops pull up and they're 2 Black kids smoking pot. What would their response have been? I'm very confident it would have been a very different response than I received, for sure.
And that story is replicated, duplicated, told over and over again across the nation, in every town, in every city. And I also wanted to make sure that, in the answering of this question, I was, upright and forthright about, the criminals, hardened criminals, deserve, in my opinion, to do the time. But once they've served their debt to society, they also deserve the opportunity to turn over a new leaf, have a second chance. And that's another thing that we often see, where a Black person who's committed a crime and sent to prison or sent to jail gets out, and they wear that stigma for the rest of their lives, where often other people get out and they're considered reformed. They're considered having served their debt to society, and now let's give them a second chance, where other people of color are not afforded that same opportunity.
So on to the next question.
Okay.
Some whites get annoyed with the term African American. Why isn't it just good enough to be an American?
I would say this: we don't say these same things when someone is of Asian descent and we call them Chinese American. Italian Americans wear that with pride. Irish Americans are allowed to call themselves Irish Americans. Every ethnicity in this country has the ability and the right to call themselves whatever they want to call themselves. And I think I answered part of this in a previous question. We are, and again, I'm not a historian, but from my experience in the close to 50 years that I've been on this planet, we are one of the only ethnicities in which other people were allowed to define what we call ourselves, from colored to Black to Negro to Afro-American and now African-American. And so my question is, what harm is it doing to acknowledge your ethnicity, where your people originated before coming to America? Almost every ethnicity in America, Mexican American, Latino American, and it's showing that while we are all American in our base, we have roots from other lands. We have roots from other continents. We have roots from other countries. So I don't have a problem calling myself an African American. Yeah, so I don't think anybody should take offense to that. And then also, this is 2020. We just took, if you are a responsible citizen, you just filled out the census. If it's not important to sort of understand the ethnicity of our people and the segment, then why are we segmenting ourselves in things like the census? Why are the demographics important from an ethnicity or racial component? From our government itself, we still continue to quantify people based on those demographics. And so what should we call ourselves then, if this is the way that we determine the demographic makeup of the country?
All right. Question number 6. Blacks seem to refer to slavery an awful lot, as if today's whites are somehow culpable for something that happened 400 years ago. Are today's whites guilty of something that they were not even associated with?
So that question itself, and the general public's understanding of this is always, I shouldn't say always, but often misguided. I don't know of people in my immediate circle who are responsible for slavery, but I damn sure know a lot of families, people, corporations, cities that benefited from the free labor that started this country. The free labor that the money of which was shipped back over to Europe, to England, France, Portugal, etc., that got many of the large corporations and banks that are still in business to this day were built on the money that came from slavery. And so when you and this goes back to one of your original questions, do Black people hate white people? And I said, no, it's not hate, but there is a resentment for this misunderstanding, this notion that people have that we all started from an equal place, and why don't Black people just pull themselves up from their bootstraps? Well, there's a structure in place in which people were allowed to benefit for decades, for centuries, from free labor that then fueled their pockets, their companies' pockets, to make tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so now the descendants of those people continue to benefit from those, where Black people can only trace their freedom back to the mid 1860s, right? So only 150, 160, 170 years ago, as opposed to 400 and 500 years ago, right? And so remind me of I'm going down a lot of different thoughts. Remind me the gist of the original question again.
So the gist of it is, okay, slavery happened 400 years ago. Oh, white guy, what did I do to
Yeah. So I don't look at white people walking around right now and say, okay, you were a slave master. But I do look at a lot of the structure of this country and say, you had an unfair advantage. Now, you know me, how hard I work, how many different hats I wear, and between being a family man, a businessman, giving back to multiple charities, I have never been one. And this didn't start with me. This goes back to my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents, who said, our family doesn't take no for an answer. Our family doesn't take, we don't make reasons and excuses. If we're able-bodied and we're able to be educated, which to me is one of the biggest opportunities to level the playing field, having a strong education. But if we have to do manual labor, if we have to educate ourselves, whatever it takes for us to say, regardless of the obstacles that were put in front of us, real, social, imaginary, whatever, we will overcome those because they're real, right? We will overcome those. We will do everything that we can to fight through this. But everybody doesn't come from that same family. Everybody doesn't come from that same structure. Everybody doesn't come from that same educational background. Everybody isn't able-bodied. Some people have a generational curse on them, which is, we were born in poverty. We never made it out. The next generation is going to be in poverty. I personally did everything I could to break free of that, to break through that. But if you start to track back familial, family, generation by generation, slavery still impacts what society at large, how society at large is structured, what people are able to do. Some people will look at one successful African-American, or they'll look at Barack Obama, for instance, and say, see, we had a person of mixed race in the White House. Clearly, racism doesn't exist, and Black people can ascend to be anything they want to be. We look at sports figures and entertainment figures and say, see, that one person has risen to this level, so clearly it's not an issue. But those same people will then look at the people who haven't made it, or maybe that same person won't, but most of society will look at the people who haven't made it and say, see how they are, or see how Black people think. And so you can't have it both ways. We have the ability to ascend to the highest office in the land. We have the ability to ascend to the most lucrative positions and jobs. At the same time, those cases are not everyone's situation. The ability is there, but the structure that holds the majority of the people back is also still there. And if for people who don't believe that, their cases pop up on a daily basis of proven institutionalized racism within police forces, within the banking structure, within academic structures, where they can go in and show the text messages that went through between police officers on meeting their quota for arresting Black and brown people. A case was just brought to light this last week of police officers in New York City saying, we had a quota of Black and brown people arrests that we needed to make. I mean, this is, I'm not making these things up. We look at some of these incidents and we think, oh, that's just a one-off. Well, if there's a one-off every other day, they're not one-offs. The structure still exists.